Hi class, how's it going? Mr. Perkins here. I am not in obviously today. I have jury duty, so I'll talk about that later. Today for your bell ringer, I want you to answer the following questions. You have 2 minutes to work on these. Really think about some of these answers. How are computers rapidly changing today's world? What problems would you expect if you had to move to a new location and start over? And have you ever had an idea for a product, and what was it? You're on 2 minutes right now. Let's get those answers in. You have about 1 more minute. Keep working. Think about those answers. Coming up on 30 seconds. It's weird that I'm there, but I'm not, right? Okay, I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds. Alright, so how are computers rapidly changing today's world? For me, I'm going to say that computers control everything today. I mean, they're on your smartphones, they run cars, they run buses, they run airplanes, they run houses now. They pretty much are the power source of everything today. What problems would you expect if you had to move to a new location and start all over? I'm guessing you're going to have to experience, what your job's going to be, where you're going to live, who are your friends, for you guys, school, college, that sort of thing. Think about moving to a new country, new culture, new customs, new language. Have you ever had an idea for a product? If so, what was it? For me, I noticed that school that I worked at, some students had tongue rings with a little ball at the top, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could put like a flavoring on top of that, top of the piercing, so like a dum-dum or like a lollipop, and then you would just unscrew it when you're done, and then put a new one on there. I'd have to raise some money in order for that to actually happen. So that's my idea. In terms of your 5-day forecast, if you want to take a look at that backboard there for a second, the major things to be aware of course, are Wednesday and Friday. You have your 2 vocab quizzes. First one's on Wednesday, second one's on Friday. Same as always. So homework tonight, make sure you finish up and make your vocab flashcards. If you need any vocab flashcards, of course, they're up on the front table. Let's get started. Alright, Industrial Revolution vocabulary. We got about 13 terms this week, so a little bit more than usual, but some of these aren't very difficult, so I think you'll be okay. First one is the Industrial Revolution. First thing we want to make sure we understand is it starts in England. Whenever you see Great Britain, that means England. Starting around the year 1780, want to make sure we understand that it's a change. Okay? If you see this word, ladies and gentlemen, that word is revolution. We want to make sure we know that that means a change. So the French Revolution was a change in how France was run. Industrial Revolution means how people worked. So it was a change from rural/farming economy to an urban/manufacturing economy. So people worked pretty much on farms, and then around this time period they moved to cities to work in manufacturing places like factories, and they were making things by hand or, in more cases, using machines to help them. Next term, rural. Okay, kind of a hard word to say, however, we need to be aware of it. You're probably never going to see this just be a single vocab definition, multiple choice question, but you'll see it in the vocab or word in the term itself, and you'll have to be able to know what that is in order to answer the question correctly. So rural means countryside, okay, living out in a way kind of like an Ellenberg Depot area. Okay, compared to Plattsburgh, Ellenberg is much more rural. Okay, you don't see a lot of cows around Plattsburgh, but if you look out my window, I'm sure you're seeing some cows just across the way there. So for the most part, many people are farmers living in rural areas, especially in the 1780s. Next vocab term is urban. Okay, anytime you see urban, you want to think cities. Okay, so New York City is an urban area. Plattsburgh, even though it's not a big city, is still an urban area. Sometimes you might see the word urbanization. Urbanization means people are moving to the cities, okay, because those are where the new jobs are going to be. The new jobs are going to be manufacturing jobs. So people are going to make things, like I said, in factories, mass-producing items, just like today. All of your items that you have today, for the most part, are not made by hand. Now they're made with robots and factories and machines. So that all that idea comes from the Industrial Revolution. Next year, when you take U.S. history, you're going to learn about the Industrial Revolution in America. It's the same basic thing, just happens here a little bit later. First starts in England, then moves around the world. So rural, countryside, urban, city areas. Next term, domestic system. Domestic. Whenever you see like domestic, you should think home. Okay, when you domesticate an animal, it lives inside your home usually. Okay, you trained it to be okay to live at home. Your cats are domesticated, your dogs are domesticated. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people, like I said, were farmers. However, some people would make extra items at home to make, again, extra money. So think of it like a part-time job. If you're a farmer, obviously you're going to be working long periods of time out in the fields, harvesting, planting. But in the winter months, you're not really doing very much, especially in the 1780s. So in order to survive and make extra money, you would stay indoors, and you might do one part of a finished product. So if you're making like a sweater, for example, you might shear sheep. Okay, that's where we get the raw material from. You might take that wool and you might spin it into thread. You might clean the wool. You might actually do the weaving. You might actually colorize it, dye it a certain color. Okay, making things at home takes more time, but for the most part, the quality of the product is pretty good, especially if you've ever bought something that's like handmade. People spend a lot of time. They care about it. It's not just some mass-produced item. So the domestic system means making things at home. It takes longer, but the quality is usually pretty good. Okay, and as a result, the price kind of goes up a little bit. So making goods at home. Next term, is the factory system. So because during the Industrial Revolution, people are moving to go to where the jobs are. Okay, jobs are usually in the rural areas where people are farming, but there's going to be some changes, and people are going to have to move to the cities to get those new jobs. When people move to the cities, the major areas that they can get work are going to be in those factories. Factories are going to be really noisy. They're not going to be very safe. A lot of laws are in place today that allow for workers to have more rights, and if they get injured, for example, they don't get fired. Well, when the Industrial Revolution begins, there's none of that. So you're working, in some cases, 16, 18 hours a day, 6 days a week. You're not getting paid very much. You don't complain because you can get fired for that. You don't get sick. If you get injured, sometimes people get like their fingers cut off in the machines, you don't show the boss because you could be fired for that. Okay, and the other thing is there's just hundreds, if not thousands, of new people coming every day to try and get jobs, so it's very competitive in those factories. So the factory system is where, again, people are making things, but the big change here is, again, where you see revolution, things change. The big change is we're starting to see machines doing much more of the actual heavy lifting. So, yeah, people are still making things by hand, but they're making just one small part on like an assembly line, for example, and then they move it down the line for the next person to work on it. Okay, today we still see this. Lots of things are made by hand still, but a lot of things are still made in factories with big machines, and it starts with the factory system. Capital. Okay. Oftentimes in social studies we say capital, you want to think like the capital city. So like Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States, or London is the capital of England. Okay. However, in this time period, we're talking about a different type of capital. Capital is money that you use to invest in new machinery, in factories. And what happens is, like, if you're a really rich person and you want to make more money, okay, you're not going to be spending 16, 18 hours a day working on the assembly line because you're not going to make money that way. What you will do instead is you raise a lot of money and then you buy an empty factory, and then you run it. So you hire people, and you buy machines, you buy the raw materials, and then they finish a product, whatever the product's going to be, and then you sell that. Okay, when you sell that, you make money off of that. It's called profit. Okay, but initially, in order to make all that happen, you had to have money to kind of invest in your business. So if I wanted to make, those flavored tongue rings, I would have to have probably a few $1,000s to invest in machines that make this kind of stuff, or to buy other machines that already do this work for me. So the money you use to invest in a business is called capital. So again, review here really quick. Industrial Revolution, people are making things in the cities. They move from rural to urban areas. Rural means farming or countryside areas. Urban means manufacturing/city areas. Domestic system, most people are making things by hand at home. Factory system, you're still kind of making things by hand, but now you have machines and you're working in a factory. You're not really going to be making stuff at home if it's the factory system. Last but not least, capital, that's money that you use to invest in a new business in order to make more money. We call that profits. All right, next term. Enclosure movement. So definition is fencing off of common lands, forcing many peasants to move to urban areas. So before people moved to the cities to get jobs, they lived, like I said, in the countryside. They lived on these small farms. People kind of did everything that they had always done, very much traditional. If your dad was a farmer, guess what? You're going to be a farmer too. And the cool thing about that system was, you could own your own land, of course, but if you didn't have any money, if you were really poor, you could still plant crops and still use certain things on what are called the common lands. Common lands are lands that anyone can use for whatever reason. So like, let's say that you don't own any land, but for whatever reason you own like a couple animals like cows. Okay, you own maybe let's go back. You own like a very small plot of land for your cows to live off of. Well, eventually the cows are going to eat all of the surrounding grasslands, and you need to make sure they are healthy so you can sell them later on for milk or whatever it's going to be. So what you do is you would take your cows to a plot of land called the common lands, and there's grasslands there, and you would just go there and have your cows do whatever you need to do. Another example, let's say again you need some you need some wood for the fire. Well, you cut down all your trees on your land. What do you do now? Well, you can buy wood, but if you want to save money, you would go to the common lands and just chop down some of the trees that are there and use that. So for years, for hundreds of years, this was how cottages worked. This is how villages worked. But then, around the 1780s, the government of England started to put up laws saying you can't do that anymore. Okay? And they would sell off the common lands to the highest bidder. So it was kind of a way for them to make extra money. Now that's all fine and good for people who have money, but if you're poor and you need those common lands, you're in a big issue here. You're going to have some problems. And so what happened was a lot of mainly peasants and poorer people had to move from where they had always lived their entire life and go to a city or an urban area to get those jobs and get those places to live. And it was just unfortunately what happened. So this is, in a way, a cause of the Industrial Revolution, one of many causes. So people had to leave because they didn't have access to these free lands anymore. That's the enclosure movement. All right, entrepreneur. So we have a French term here, but it means pretty much someone who takes a risk in order to create some new kind of business. So going back to the bell ringer, I said, if you ever have an idea for a new product, if you actually create that product, people will call you an entrepreneur. So it doesn't matter what the idea is, doesn't matter if you're actually making something, or even like a website. Okay? Mark Zuckerberg, who created Facebook, he was an entrepreneur. Steve Jobs, who created Apple, all the iProducts, iPads, iPhones, all that kind of stuff, he was an entrepreneur. So, Ronald McDonald, who created the McDonald's hamburgers and all that, he was an entrepreneur. Anyone who creates a business and kind of invests their money, they're taking a risk because, again, sometimes businesses don't work out. So that's kind of the risk here. So sometimes risks have to be made in order to create something new like a business. So the people in the Industrial Revolution who put a lot of money up were risking in order to create some new kind of business, and they were called entrepreneurs. Interchangeable parts. So a production method using identical, easy-to-make parts to repair machines. So nowadays, if something happens on your car, let's say like a small part of your car breaks, you bring it to the shop, and the guy goes in there and he kind of finds what needs to be fixed, and you just fix that one specific part. Okay? Sometimes they're really expensive, sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's like, $5 a little part here. Before interchangeable parts, if some big machine broke, you would have to buy a brand new big machine. So imagine like anytime anything small happened on your car, like a spark plug, which is a very, very cheap little thing that can go out every now and then. If that thing went, and again, spark plugs cost, a couple bucks. Imagine paying a brand new car every time you had to change a spark plug. That'd be insane. You wouldn't want to do that. It would be so expensive. Your car costs $20,000 to $30,000 depending on the model. Why should you have to pay $30,000 because one little tiny part is broke? Well, in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, they had to do that. If the big machine broke that was making all your items, you had to pony up all that money again and rebuy a big, expensive machine. Then they discovered, what if we just fix the one actual part that is actually broke and then just charge for that? So they kind of changed and made it a lot easier to have these big working machines working non-stop, because if something broke, you would just fix that one little part. You would have extra parts for spare parts, and it worked very well. This made it easier for there to be lots and lots of factories all over England and later on Europe and the world. Interchangeable parts. Division of labor. A technique in which each worker does one specific task, or in other words, an assembly line. So back last page, we talked about the domestic system where, a farmer might make one part of like a sweater, for example. Well, some of those people would make the entire thing from scratch. Again, they own the goats, or the sheep. They would shear the sheep, do the entire process, and make everything. And again, it works. It just takes a long time. If you want to cut down on the amount of time it takes to make any kind of island, you're going to divide up the work or divide up the labor. So another way of explaining this, and some from my own past, like working at Taco Bell. I could work on the line and make any item you wanted me to make. Tacos, burritos, whatever it's going to be, gorditas, quesadillas, whatever. I could do all the work, and after a while, I got really good at it. But it does take some time. Now, if I only had to make one, it wouldn't be an issue. But if I had to make like 100 tacos, that would take me a good amount of time. But if you had 8 people or 5 people doing one specific job per taco, you would be able to make 100 tacos in a much quicker, more orderly fashion. And that's what we did. So if you ever go to like a fast food restaurant, kind of look behind the counter and watch as they make your items. Usually it's not one person doing all the work. They have each person doing a specialized task. So like McDonald's, they have people in the back making the burgers, someone's making the fries, someone's making the drinks. It's called division of labor. So in all these factories, you would see just hundreds and hundreds of people doing the exact same job over and over again, but it would help to make more and more items. It gets boring, but it's an easy job, easy to train people. Division of labor. We can review. The enclosure movement, people were forced to move to the cities because there were these free lands called common lands that were not accessible anymore. An entrepreneur is someone who takes a risk, because sometimes businesses don't always work, to create a new business. Interchangeable parts. If something breaks, you just repair that one specific part, and then everything works really well. Division of labor. This is where one worker does one specialized task over and over again to make the finished product. So again, think like Taco Bell. One person puts the meat into the taco, one person puts the lettuce, one person puts the cheese, one person wraps it, and then you hand it off to the customer. That's division of labor. Last little bit here, and then we're done. All right. In order for a lot of these factories to work, we have to talk about a couple new machines. The major area that really started the Industrial Revolution was textiles, okay, making clothing. Clothing was the big draw during that time. Like nowadays, most companies make electronic devices like iPods and stuff like that. In the 1780s, the big thing was clothing, okay, using cotton, using silk, using other items. So you see a lot of new machines created during this time period are made for making clothing. So So the first one is called the flying shuttle. And what it was it was a weaving machine, which if you ever watch someone like weave something or crochet, it's a very intense sort of process. It takes a long time for them to make something. This was a way that you could have one person manning this machine, and they could do double, triple the times of work that normally a person would have to do because they're using a machine. So it speeds up the weaving process. So now instead of a week to make one shirt, you could spend a week and you can make 100 shirts. So it just sped up the weaving process. Next one, the spinning jenny. This was created by an inventor called James Hargreaves. And what had happened was the machine pretty much sped up the process of spinning thread. So if you've ever seen a spinning wheel before, you take your bulk of your cotton or whatever it's going to be, you kind of thin it out a little bit, and you put it on a wheel, and you spin the wheel, and it kind of draws out the lines. So then you have a spool of products that you can put it in the weaving machine. Because the flying shuttle was doing so well, they needed more spools of thread. So the spinning jenny, again, speeds up the spinning process. So now instead of one person on a spinning wheel, now you have a machine that does the work of, let's say, 5 spinning wheels. So you can have more spools of thread so that the flying shuttle can use those to speed up to make more shirts or pants or whatever it's going to be. So you have the flying shuttle and the spinning jenny. Last but not least, we have the steam engine. Okay? A big part of a lot of these new factories is electricity really, it's not there yet. Okay? It will be coming out pretty soon here, in which you have lots of machines running on, batteries and electricity. But for a while there, they were using, at first, muscle power. So you would have, people or animals, rotating the machines, making them work. And that only works so long as you were able to have enough muscle power. And then they were able to hook up giant water wheels next to rivers, and the river power would happen. The water wheel would spin because the river was moving, and that would power the machines. And then there was something invented called the steam engine, which, even though it says the name James Watt right here, guys, he didn't invent it, he just improved it. He made it much more efficient. So we're going to say it was improved on by him. He was able to make it much more compact, make it much more powerful, much more efficient. So steam engine works pretty simply. You put water in, you heat it up, it creates steam, and the pressure from the steam can be used to power the mechanisms within that machine. So all of a sudden you start seeing more and more factories being run by steam power. You also see railroads that are starting to be created that also use the steam engine. So you would have to have someone shoveling in coal to keep the fire going, to keep up more and more steam. Then later on, eventually, it'll be replaced by electricity, which happens around the early 1900s. So that's the steam engine. So you get the flying shuttle, which sped up the weaving process, so you can make much more items like more shirts. The spinning jenny increased the amount of thread that you could actually use. And then last but not least, you have the steam engine, which later on becomes like the engine that runs the entire Industrial Revolution. So finishing up here for your exit slip, let's grab that out, please. You should have enough time to do all those questions right there. So during the Industrial Revolution, the economy changed from what to what? Where did the Industrial Revolution begin? What is an entrepreneur? And what do they use capital for? So you're going to answer those on your Monday bell ringer extra slip. Homework tonight, of course, is to turn those into flashcards. You should have a little bit of class time left over to start that. Tomorrow, of course, is Tuesday, so you have your DBQ's Day homework to work on. Wednesday is your matching quiz. Friday is your fill-in-the-blank sort of quiz. I don't know if I'll be back tomorrow. We'll see. Signing off, Mr. Perkins.